Welcome back to Undulations. I'm super excited to start talking about the Elektron model cycles today, but first, here's a brief public service announcement. Now, if you asked me, what's your favorite synth? I'd probably have to say the Make Noise O-Coast. And I've shown it a lot of times on this channel, so that probably doesn't come as any surprise. But what you might find surprising is if I had to pick any overall real favorite piece of gear, it would be this. It would be the Elektron Digitact, whatever you want to call it. I love this thing. I love the sequencer on it. I love how to use it. I love that you can record samples on it. You can resample with it. You can use the mixing thing as a way to just like really, do anything from an ambient track to something that's more dancey. It is a powerful machine. You can do sample editing on it. And so I love it. I've never done a video about it. And so I just want to put that out there that I really love the Digitact. Now, Elektron got the idea to make a simplified version of their sampler, the Digitact. And so that is where the model samples comes in. And so I've done 2 videos on this channel for the model samples. And honestly, they are by far the 2 most popular videos on here. And so I have a great deal of fun working with this thing. And so when something else was coming out in the model line, the model cycles, I really thought that's probably something that I would like a lot. So before we get to that though, just think about the model samples. It takes a lot of the sequencing power of the Digitact and sort of puts it into smaller form factor, and there are a lot more exposed knobs, so you're not having to do the menu diving that you do in the Digitact. But one of the main things, well, it's half the cost to get the model samples, but also there's no direct sample recording on the model samples, so there's no resampling. And so one of the whole aspects of the Digitact is sort of lost because you have to hook the model samples up to the computer to use it. Now, before I go any further, for those of you that own the model samples, make sure to do the update. And I hadn't done it, my bad, because there are some things that have really improved on it, like they've added in velocity modulation. So if you think of that, where you've got LFO able to change parameters on the model samples, now that can also be a function of modulation. So that gives you articulation, where when you hit something soft, it sounds one way. When you hit it harder, it sounds another way. So it is a big improvement to this device. And while I'm on the topic of updating things, if you get a model cycles, maybe you've already had a model samples, you get a model cycles, make sure to update the Elektron transfer software, because you need to use the updated version of Elektron transfer to even see the model cycles. And I suggest you just go ahead and keep up with the updates on the model cycles too, especially while it's kind of a new thing. So the next part of this story, and I'm not trying to make it too long-winded, but I think it does give an important context, is this is the Elektron Digitone, which also I've never done a video about. I love this thing. It's in some ways got so much depth to it that while I've done a little bit of sound design on it, I've spent more time just sort of enjoying it. One time I left it set up on my table for months and just played sort of the same preset on it. I think it was like Slight Delay or something like that was what it was called. I just loved playing on the Digitone, and I feel like that if you look at this scene where you've got Digitact, model samples, Digitone, it completely makes sense that you would fill this pattern out. If you're Elektron, that you would fill this pattern out with the model cycles. And so that's where we're at. We've got a thing that is sort of a mini Digitone, and it totally makes sense. And so what I want to talk about right now is I've gone a little bit into how these two differ. One question is, how do these two differ? And so I think the first thing that we should do is talk some about how these two work. And that's by FM synthesis. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I think it's important to know a little bit just in terms of understanding what the differences between these two devices actually are, and between these two and some of the other devices that I have here. I like doing this just to give you guys in terms of price and that sort of thing, like how does the model cycles stack up against something like the Volca drum? So we'll get to that in just a second. But to start with, I've got some blocks here, and what you'll hear in FM synthesis is operators. And okay, so an operator is basically an oscillator, and you'll have things like the carrier and the modulator and stuff like that. But the main thing to know is just that the more operators that you have, the more complex the sound that you can make. And it's not always clear what level of device is going to have how many operators. So I've got 4 blocks here. The Digitone has got 4 operators. The model cycles has got 4 operators. Now, over here on the Arturia Microfreak, they have 2 operator FM. And then over here on the Volca drum, I think I call that, there's a main oscillator, so that's 1, modulation oscillator, that's 2, and then they've got an envelope as well. So, you know, it's 2 roughly. But then if you look at something like the Volca FM, it is a 6 operator FM synthesizer. So you can set up a lot of complex, what are referred to as algorithms on the Volca FM, for example. And now, what is the algorithm? The algorithm is sort of like how you have the blocks stacked. Do you have them like this, like one operator going into another one, going into another one, and then going into that one? And there can be feedback. There can be the depths or the strength of the modulation connections. There can be so-called ratios, settings, and that sort of thing. And so you might have them set up like this, where there's 2 and 2. And I don't have it here, but like on the Volca FM card, that has 32 different modulation algorithms, or FM algorithms. And so that's a lot to choose from. You basically don't have, I think, any algorithm to choose from on the Microfreak. And then you could kind of debate on the Volca drum how many there are there. But the main thing would be that on these devices, the Digitone and the model cycles, they are 4 operator FM synthesis schemes. And so there's that, but then the question is, well, how many algorithms are there? And so that means that if they both have got the same number of operators to make sounds with, how many different ways can you hook them up? And the thing is that on the Digitone, they have it set at 8 different algorithms. And on the model cycles, they don't really talk about algorithms as much as their so-called machines. And I think you can basically equate, I know there are going to be some differences in terms of parameters and filtering and stuff like that, but you can kind of equate a machine with a algorithm. And so if you use one algorithm for a type of sound, that's why the different machines on the model cycles, which is just, that's Elektron's name for a type of sounds that you can make. And so they have a kick machine on here, a snare machine, they have a chord machine, a tone machine, a metal machine, and a percussion machine, so it's perc. Now, there's a initial confusion that can happen with the model cycles, is that it has 6 different tracks and it has 6 different machines, algorithms, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to stick with their nomenclature. So 6 machines, 6 tracks. But it's important to realize that you're not just stuck with like machine 1 on track 1 and machine 2 on track 2, that sort of thing. You can put any machine on any track, no exceptions. So like the clip that I did at the beginning of the video, that was 6 of the kick machines operating in different ways on each of the 6 tracks. And so you can think about how that would be an advantage, where if you wanted to limit in a pattern or a style, if you wanted to limit the amount of percussion, have it be more melodic, more focused on harmonies or that sort of thing, then you can do that. And in that sense, it is similar to the Volca drum, where there's no inherent limitation on what type of synthesis you put on what track. And that's the only reason I have the Volca Beats out here. It's not a FM synth, but it is more of a classic drum machine, where that you have 10 different tracks, 10 different sounds, and you're limited to where the first part, they call it a part rather than a track, but the first part has got kick drum on it, and you're not going to be modifying that. So that is a completely different thing, where that you're limited with one sound on a specific track, compared to the model cycles, where that you have all this flexibility. And so that said, I got a little bit of a diagram here, and I think we ought to look at that. Okay, so this is sort of my take on the sort of the development of the model cycles, which is that if you think of the Digitone as having this huge space of parameters and sound, so that you can set up your algorithms or whatever and dial in anything on this map. So think of that as the entire sound space that you can explore with the Digitone. Then what Elektron did was they chose a set of algorithms, I guess filtering, whatever other features that would limit what each of these machines that you have access to in the model cycles can do, so that you're able to get sort of some space, that you have certain distinct types of sounds. But I think you should realize that just because something is said to be like a tone or even a chord, doesn't mean that you probably couldn't make a percussive sound out of it. And many of these other percussive things like metal, certainly perc or kick, you can make tonal things as well. Everything can be played chromatically on the model samples, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but that's a big aspect of it. And so this is sort of what you're looking at, where that you have a sort of a limited, and I don't necessarily mean limited in a bad sense, because there are a lot of sounds in FM synthesis that you just probably wouldn't use. So some of these spaces out here on the Digitone might just be sort of a void. And so that's the first point, would be that the sounds that you can actually make, I don't know that it's a one-to-one thing, where that anything that you can make on the model cycles, you could certainly make on the Digitone. I'm not saying that, but this is just sort of a general way to think about it, that you're kind of in a little bit of a zone on these machines, and you don't get to sort of range out and do all the weirdness that you can do on the Digitone. Now, part of the reason for that is that on the Digitone, you've got access to the raw FM parameters. So things like frequencies and modulation depths and feedbacks, and they're explicitly put into the dials, the menus and such on the Digitone. And so you can really kind of like, if it's your thing, you can do sound design at a more of a raw level. Now, I still think that they've done some things on the Digitone to simplify it, but it is much more the case of being in direct touch with the FM synthesis. But one of the biggest things about the model cycles is that they wanted to stay with the same model format. And so I think that's what they're calling it. So same box, same number of knobs and stuff like that. And so what does that turn out to mean? Well, it means that you've got a sample start on here. That does not apply to an FM synthesis box. You've got sample length, so that doesn't apply. And then they also decided that the cutoff and the resonance, so the filter on here, that it would be maybe better to wrap that up with some other parameters. And I'm going to use the term macro here. And that's just where you've still got filtering that you can do on the model cycles, but they're not as independent as they are on the model samples. Anyway, I'm just saying that there are 4 knobs on here that have been basically repurposed, and some of the other ones are going to be obvious, where that, like, you don't need the sample button, you need a preset select button. So some of it's pretty just a very straightforward thing, but these other things where that it's sort of like, I think Elektron probably just thought, how can we best pack a FM synthesizer into this same format? And I really think they've done a nice job, and some of that has to do with the kind of the macroing and the use of some fairly generic parameter terms. And so if you've seen other videos or read about the model cycles, you'll remember that they've talked about color, shape, sweep, and contour. And one thing that I want to do is just sort of go through what these things do so you can realize kind of the deal on it. That when I'm talking about changing a color knob on the model cycles, color's just generic enough to where it allows you to kind of have an intuitive feel for what's going on, but it doesn't mean the same thing technically for each of the machines that you're doing this on. So for one of them, it adds a soft square-like modulation. Another one, inharmonicity. Another one is tune offset A. Here's another inharmonicity, the modular ratio, and then for chords, it's something completely different. Now, on some of these other ones, like shape, it's, again, this is a triangular modulation and feedback, modulation amount and feedback, modulation amount and feedback. And I'm not going to go through all this, but just to say that there is a logic to how they've tried to turn 4 knobs into something that gives meaningful changes to each of the different machines. And so it's not the same thing on each machine, nor would you really want it to be. So for example, on like the chord one, the knobs will do sort of chord things. On the chord machine, the knobs will do chord related things, whereas on the kick machine, the knobs will do kick drum related machines. And so they could have tried to just call them knobs A, B, C, or A, B, X, Y, do it like a Nintendo controller. But I think that the choice to make it more intuitive by naming them makes sense. And so to summarize all of that, we've got sort of a reduced set of algorithms compared to the Digitone. We've got a reduced set of controls compared to the Digitone. And then also some of the features like the effects and that sort of thing on the Digitone are scaled down on here and sort of wrapped up into the color, shape, sweep, and contour. So it is a reduction, but it's like, at this point, I want to say that it's more of a reduction sort of in degree rather than in kind between the Digitact and the model samples, where the thing about not being able to record or edit samples on the model samples, that's a major factor. So I think that, I'll just go ahead and say what I think the major factor between these two is, between the Digitone and the model cycles, is that the Digitone is polyphonic. And think about that you're able to pick a sound, make chords and such from that sound, play it from a keyboard. I don't even know the level of polyphonicity on the Digitone. It's that much. I seem to just be able to do whatever I want. But the point would be that that is not the case on the model cycles. And so that's somewhat of a limitation, but you can still do some of the same types of things that you would do on the Volca drum, where that if you want to play your own very specific chords or harmonies, you can just duplicate tracks. Maybe you duplicate the tone track. I've already done a thing like that. I think I'm going to use it in the next Delta Waves video, but there you're just trying to, you sacrifice some of your tracks to make the harmonic content that you want. Now, in the middle there of complete monophonic behavior and full polyphonic behavior, they do give the chord machine, which has a lot of different things that you can select in terms of chord types. We'll go through that in a minute. And so you can change roots, chords, and the other thing is that since this is an Elektron device, you've got parameter locking, and so you're going to be able to make complex and meaningful chord progressions on the model cycles. Now, I know that this is running long, but I just want to try and say as much as I can for people that are thinking about buying the model cycles, or maybe for people that can't make up their minds on whether to get the model samples or the model cycles. That's going to be sort of the last thing that I talk about. But for right now, let's skip talking about FM and not going to worry about the Digitone because it's twice as much and not really sort of a competitive choice in that price range. So to me, the main question would be, out of gear that I have that's sort of even close to the same price range, possibly less, how does the model cycles stack up? And I guess one thing to talk about is the Volca FM. Volca Beats is a non-starter, but the Volca FM, if you want to make just like very precise FM sounds, and that's sort of the main interest is as an FM device, well, then maybe. And I think that one of the themes out of everything that I'm getting ready to talk about is layering, okay? This is 3-note polyphonic, but you're not able to, there's no built-in delay or reverb. Delay and reverb does help sort of smear things out and allow you to make things seem layered, but there's none of that built into this, and I don't think you can parameter lock. You might be able to parameter lock or motion sequence, that is, the algorithm, but that's going to be a thing where if you're not able to change the intrinsic parameters, then it's just going to be sort of firing blind at the sounds that you want. So I want to say that you're pretty much stuck with a sound on the Volca FM within a given pattern, and you can chain them together or whatnot, or switch patterns to get different sounds. But in terms of layering sounds, this is not it. And then, as much as I love the Microfreak, I think that something that everybody has pretty much found out is that while you can make cool percussion sounds, bass sounds, amazing synth sounds with it, and it is a highly playable instrument, layering is honestly where it falls short. It's got a wide diversity of sounds, because if you think about it, they didn't just go with FM synthesis, you know, all the way like is done on the model cycles. Instead, there are all these other different types of wave synthesis and wavetable, and there is the 2-op FM, but there's noise and stuff like that. So you can get a lot of very different sounds, and it's highly expressive. It's got a very well controllable keyboard, nice sequencer, parameter locking. So very pro Microfreak. But in terms of making a complete song, I mean, you need to probably use a DAW or a looper or that sort of thing. So it's not as standalone by a long shot. Then how about the Volca drum? One of the biggest shortcomings of it is, at least as of the last update, you can't play it chromatically by MIDI. Okay, so just think about that in terms of playability by using a keyboard or even by using a DAW. You just can't. And so it's a thing where the playability is mostly just being able to, I mean, I think it's got great sounds. It's got the layering that you would want, but in terms of this being able to make chromatic sounds, quantized sounds, you can do it within the sequencer, but you can't do it externally. So you can't play into it. You can't record into it from a keyboard or something like that. You're limited with the 16-step sequences, and that you can only have 16 patterns on here, and that it is not convenient to be able to store those or have a library or get them from somebody else that has one, that sort of thing. Not saying that it can't be done, but it's certainly not convenient on the level of the model cycles with the Elektron transfer for being able to store stuff. And in terms of patterns, this thing, you know, it can go, okay, first of all, there are 6 banks of 16 patterns. And so that's using the pads and the trigs to select. So that's 96 patterns within a project. And I think there are 96 projects on this thing. And so that's a ton of different patterns, and there's also chaining. And then you're not limited to 16 trigs. You can, with pages, get extended out to 64. So it's great in that sense. A lot of things that you can do is scaling the tempos. We're going to get all into that in a later video, probably maybe the next one. I'm going to talk some about sequencers, some about LFOs. It's going to be a lot to go through on this, and I'm planning on 3-4 videos in all on this. But the point would be that there's a lot more storage and just a lot more potential for the sequencer on the model cycles compared to the Volca. And to repeat, I do love the Volca drum, but this has just got more firepower. It costs more, so you would expect that. Now, last thing, let's talk about model cycles versus model samples in terms of, you know, which one you would prefer. I think, as you would probably expect, I am not the one to decide that for you. It comes entirely down to what you're trying to do with it, what your plan for it is. And I think with each of them, you can get sort of a sophisticated layered sound that is very good. They both got strong sequencer. They've got strong features like LFOs, and now this velocity dependent modulation. The exposed knobs are the same. And so, you know, it might come down to whether you are sort of a sample sort of person, whether you have a library of samples that you want to use. Then it's all a matter of just loading them on here. You know, I've not really heard anything in the way of complaints about space on here, but that's something to think about, is that samples take up space. But man, just the settings of your synthesis parameters for a preset on the model cycles, I don't think there's any real like limitation on, you know, I mean there is, but it's not a very important one for how many presets you can fit on here. So there's something sort of self-contained and intact about the model cycles in that sense. But again, it's all going to come down to what you're trying to do with it. You can get some wild synthy type sounds. One of the videos that I did do with this was on granular synthesis. It's some very different types of sounds that seem sort of unexpected. So again, I can't really say, but I will say that I think that they're both strong devices, and I'm going to try and learn more and do more with this as I make these videos. And if my opinion on that changes, I've already used it some, but if my opinion on that changes, I will be sure to say something. So let's go ahead and start hearing some sounds on the model cycles. Okay, so let's take a look at the overall layout of the model cycles. You've got a clickable knob over here for on, off, and the volume, and then this very important clickable endless encoder that allows us to set things like the track level and the track pan, but you also use it a ton in conjunction with this display for doing things like changing presets, naming things like your patterns, and scrolling through parameters and parameter settings. So it's a critical knob over here. Then the knobs in this 4x3 array control the track parameters. So this is more about controlling the sound. And most of them are just one function. There are a couple down here that you have to shift for with the function button. And this is a good point to show that anything that requires the function button is underlined. So for example, this is going to be controlling where the machine, which machine you're using. So there's kick, and I can change that with the encoder to snare. But once you've done that, I'm going to change it back and then back out. If I hit shift, it goes to the underline thing, which is the preset menu. Okay, so we already start digging into the folders. We're in the factory folder right now. Okay, so then there are going to be some things like swing or nudge that is not underlined. Okay, so it's something that is in gray, not written on the button, but isn't underlined. That's something that's not a function thing, but just is more context sensitive. So for example, track, I can change tracks by just using the track button, but if I use function and hit track, it's going to call up the track menu, and that's what it says right there, it's track menu. And yet if I use the track button on something else like delay send, okay, that will send delay to all the tracks. So control all is how you access there. So that's just sort of the overall labeling scheme, and it turns out to be very handy. You rarely ever have to look at the manual to use this thing. But anyway, back on the layout. These are the pads, obviously, so this is where the sound comes from. Right now, I'm in the very first preset as it ships, and I feel like that, or I should say the first pattern as it ships, I feel like that's a good thing to look at because a lot of companies know that's going to be your first impression, and Elektron is no exception. I still remember the first pattern on the Digitone. So I'm going to hit play just so we can hear some stuff. So you can tell by the lights what's being hit, which track, and you got the trigs running along there, so that's nice. But then this is important to look at which page you're in. So you can see that right now we're in the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, and there's some good variety. Now, the next thing I want to do is switch out of this first factory pattern and go to something that's more of an init, a blank pattern. And to do that, I am going to skip over A and B banks, go to bank C. So this is how we select the bank. We press pattern and then choose A, B, C. And then I'm going to choose pattern 5 because I had used the first 4. Now, these are the generic sounds. And one thing to say is that if we go function and push this is the pad menu. I've got it set at fixed velocity on the pads, so I don't have to smack it for this video. So I don't have velocity dependence on. Also, the trig buttons that you can push to get tones, those are not velocity sensitive ever. So going to come back out of that. Let's see what we got. Okay, so if we want to play something like this chromatically, we're on track 6, and yeah, so right now it's trig number 9 is the same as the pad. Okay, so that gives a general idea of how you make the sounds. Then over here we've got let's see, this is a back or an undo. This is how you dig down into settings, so things like how you deal with a pattern project, and then a bunch of other things. This is BPM related stuff, and then these are your transport things, and very importantly, copy, clear, paste. And so for something like that, say I'm on track 1, got that kick. If I want to copy that, I hold track, hit function, and then do this button for copy. It says copy track 1 sound. I can come over here, and right now that's a snare. If I want to do the paste, I just do the same key sequence, and now we've got a kick over here. So that's a great way to be moving things around. You can copy and paste trigs. It's very versatile in terms of copy and paste, and probably, you know, pretty much just try it whenever it makes sense. So then we've got retrigger, and there's a retrigger menu that you get to. A lot of settings to change on that. I love the retrigger features on the model samples, and so this is going to be just, I hope, exactly the same. And then moving around, we come to things about the sound. So this button, super important. This is how you choose the machine. So right now I've got a bunch of parameters set up, and this is sort of like what I was saying with the Volca FM in the introduction, which is that I've got metal there. I can change the machine, but you may find that the parameters that are set out here don't make the right sound that you want. So if you change the machine, you're probably going to have to change the parameters. Okay, next thing worth showing is if you shift and go there, that's going to be the preset menu. So down in the factory, you've got bass drums, you've got, that's a clap, I guess, cymbal, sound effects, hi-hat, percussion, RS, not really sure what that is, but snare drum. I like some of the synthy sounds that I've heard. There was it this one? Yeah, I kind of like that. So there are a ton of built-in sounds that just ship with the factory settings. That's great. This button, this is the punch button. Turn that on, it makes things more punchy. A little hard to hear on that setting. Let's, it's probably because I haven't selected it. Let me just go ahead and select it. Okay. Then we're going to come back out. Make sure that's here. Then hit punch. I guess I hear that. It's more substantial on other stuff. Yeah, I can hear it best on that. So that's punch, and then this gate button is important. That's a toggle. So punch is a toggle, gate is a toggle. Now instead of a thing like that where that I don't have any hold to it, I can hold it down and it still has the same envelope. I can put the gate on. And so that's going to be super handy for a lot of stuff. Okay, and then that's a good point to mention that I gotta make sure I don't cover the display. You've got control over tons of parameters from these main 12 knobs. So that's decay. I'm gonna leave it crisp, and we'll put some delay send. Reverb send. Make the reverb room size bigger. Delay time longer. More delay feedback. Turn the gate off. And then I think the last thing that would be good to show here is just how you might put in a simple sequence. Let's go over to track 1. We're not going to do anything too complicated here. I hit record. I turned on some kick drums. Now remember that I mangled this, so I think this is a kick drum also. What we'll do is put these in a few different spots, and then we're going to change the color. So we get some nice sound that way. Maybe we put a little punch on that. And then if you don't want a track to make a sound, you can hold the track button. So what is this? This is that. All right. I'm going to turn that delay feedback down a little bit to get it within the timing. Then, since we're just right here at it, I'm going to show a little parameter locking. We're going to hold this down, and I'm going to change the note. Alright, I'm not sure what I like on that. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn the volume down on that hit. So that almost makes it sound like a echo that is a different pitch. Let's go over here. So that's sort of just a percussion. We'll just throw on some tricks for that. I'm going to turn this down so it doesn't dominate. Lower the pitch. I need to do it right-handed so you can see that. I'll lower the pitch by an octave. Camera ran out of batteries. I've got it back on. We're going to keep rolling. Do some pitch changes here. Then we got chords here. So we've just been working our way through some of the different machines. I haven't been calling it out, but if we take a look, over here, kick, I duplicated the kick there, so we have no snare in our pattern right now. Chord there, perk there, tone there. Alright, and then chord on that one. I think I'm going to put maybe a late-ish hit in the sequence, and we will turn the volume up on that a little. It starts to distort slightly. So I'm using the shape knob to change the chord setting. We got unisons. Okay, so I feel like I got ahead of myself there. I'm going to hit function and hit pattern to reload the pattern. And so now we're just back to the generic init sounds. And let's wind this video out just by looking at the four main knobs: color, shape, sweep, and contour for the different machines. Okay, and to reiterate, as I said in some of the intro, just because you've got a kick on track 1 and a snare on track 2 and so on and so forth, you can put any machine on any track, and you're not limited to just one. They can all be kicks, they can all be chords, whatever you want. So we're going to go here, and you will see that this is the kick machine, and let's just hit it, change some stuff. So this is color, putting a little bit of that sweep into it too. Then, you know, they're all independent, so it's like a 4-dimensional hypercube of parameters, and so I'm just going to be sort of weaving a little path through that, and there are a lot of sounds that we just won't hear because there's not time. That was the shape. Now change the sweep, and I'll boost the decay out some so we can hear it a little better. And this gives that chirp at the beginning. It's a lot of different kick drum sounds. Okay, I think that's good. We'll go to snare, color. I'm going to use one of the trigs so I don't have to keep smacking the pads. Sort of hollows it out. Okay, then we'll go to shape, see what that does. Oh wow, that's got sort of a classic snare sound. Again, chirpy, more solid. And then with contour. And you could be changing pitch on this too, so if you think that's too high or too thin sounding. All right, nice. And then the next one is the metal. So I think this is meant to be more like hats, cymbals, that sort of thing, not necessarily bells or such. Some real sizzle there. You can hear that additional modulation from the color. So right now I'm changing shape and sweep. Crisp that up. There's a ton of different hat noises possible in this thing. And then don't forget that you can add in the overdrive, distortion, and punch. I don't know if you'd ever want to gate that, but yeah, you probably would. Okay, we're moving along. This one is perk. I think this is for things like toms, that sort of thing. I'll try just punch up front, gate. So you see that that's the sort of tonal thing that could be useful in a pattern. Let's just go through some of the parameters. Color. So that's a pretty classic FM percussion sound. Again, some of the parameters are going to be different depending on where the other parameters are set. This one seems tricky. I'm going to try zeroing these last two. Wow. Take the pitch down. Bring up some distortion. Punch. So I'm in perk, but you see how that could be a kick drum of some sort. Especially when you start to add in the LFO and velocity dependence. Okay, that one seemed a little trickier to figure out. Then we're at tone. So one thing to notice is that the color settings for tone are very different with looks like values that are out to the thousandths place. So I'm not sure what that means. I've got it at 5.000, 5.005. So that one's apparently quite sensitive. So some of the knobs are even going to have a different display. I know that about the chords, but even for tone, it's got some different display characteristics. Sweep. That adds in some noise. It's a ton of different sounds out of the tone. And again, you can drop the pitch and think about other ways that you might use it, maybe as percussion. Alright, last machine is chord. And I really like this one. I feel like there's going to be a lot of good uses for it, but think about that you can change where you're at chromatically. So if you wanted to do a chord progression, you would think about what, and this would be in a sequence, you'd think about what note you're parameter locking the trig to, and then also the chord parameters. I think you can get a lot of different variety. All right, so let's start with where we're at, and then I'm going to start changing color. So that strikes me as more of a tonal thing. I have notes on what all these things do, but I think it's better just to turn the knobs and see. This is chord type here, so that's pretty straightforward. And they do have some more tonal ones like fifths, and then down at the bottom, the 2 unison and 3 unison with some frequency spread there. And I'll do it by hand, but think about this with the gate on, and if you had an LFO, add some reverb to that. I don't want to go off the rails here, but I like that sound. Increase the decay. Alright, and we'll look into doing that with the LFO in later videos. Turn the reverb back off and see if we can get a contour effect. I think some of it is tied to the decays. Yeah, I hear that. So that is radically different, right? Reverb that. Really pretty. Okay, I think I've gone at this enough for this first video, and I think that we're gonna have a lot of interesting things to explore on the model cycles. All right, that was a lot of conversation up front, but we did ultimately get into making some sounds on the model cycles, and I feel like in upcoming videos I want to just go from there, and we'll use the LFO and velocity dependent modulation to try and make those sounds more dynamic, and also we use parameter locking on the sequencer to change sounds as we go through a pattern. And there's even a feature that is preset locking, which is where that you can basically just have one preset for one part of the sequence, another, and that can be a sequence that has presets on a per trig basis. So it's very powerful, a lot of different sounds that you can get out of that way, and a lot of ways to use that musically. And then along the way, we'll be looking at things like randomization and changing pattern lengths on a per track basis to make patterns more interesting, get some polyrhythmic and phased patterns. That's cool. And then adding in things like the various effects, in particular using the delay as a sort of looping buffer. That can be cool. That's what I did in the very beginning of the video. So it's a lot of things that are going to be very interesting about the model cycles. And then lastly, this is a stressful time in the world right now, and I feel like music is good for us. So let's listen and learn and create, and I wish you all well wherever you are.
Biography. Store, let's get to